Welcome to Legislature This Week, brought to you by West Virginia News, the State Journal, and West Virginia Public Broadcasting. Legislature This Week is sponsored by Mon Health Systems, as well as SEVA WV and the West Virginia High Technology Consortium. We have a really big show planned for you today, and we're kicking things off with the West Virginia Speaker of the House, Roger Hanshaw. Roger, thank you. We're honored to have you with us today.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Also with us is West Virginia News Senior Government Affairs writer Charles Young. He's got some questions to kick things off. Charles, go ahead.
All right, Mr. Speaker, I wanted to ask you a little bit about the campus carry bill. You know, our public hearing just wrapped up. I think only one gentleman during the hearing spoke in favor of the bill. We've had the presidents of WVU and Marshall speak out against this. I know it was tried last session and we ran out of time. Talk a little bit about why this issue has arisen again and what you expect to happen when we get a House vote on this.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on this morning. As my mentor here in the legislature was John Schott up in our Judiciary Committee. Everyone knows that. I'm a great fan of former Chairman Schott. John Schott used to say when he was here, every bill is important to somebody. And he's right. Every bill is important to somebody. This bill is no different. It's a bill that's been percolating around our legislative process for a number of years. There was sufficient support, or appears to be sufficient support, among the members of the body this year to advance that bill forward. Folks asked that it be placed on an agenda, and our chair of judiciary was willing to honor that request. So today was the public hearing for it, and it'll advance through the regular legislative process.
In the talking to you earlier there, Speaker, you had mentioned three big items that you believe the legislature is going to be able to accomplish. Let's look at the tax plan right now. Finance Committee Chair Chris has indicated that he sees the 50% reduction in the PIT that was in the House plan as the, quote, starting point of negotiations. That's a pretty big gap between 15% in the Senate plan, 50% in the House and Governor Justice plan. How do you bridge that divide?
It is, but you know, when you think about where we are with taxes, I like to think about the two plans that have passed both houses so far as really bookends of a discussion. So the House passed a very simple 50% reduction focused only on one tax, only on just the personal income tax. The Senate's plan is much more comprehensive. It takes bites out of several taxes, and there's probably not a right or wrong approach there. So I know we're going to have meetings as early as this afternoon today between our body, the House of Delegates, our colleagues in the Senate, and Governor Justice about just how big a bite do we take of each of those pieces. So I actually do see an agreement being possible here. I actually do see it likely that we'll be able to take bites out of all the various things that our Senate colleagues have proposed and come to an agreement here. It likely won't be 50%. It likely won't be the 50% bill that the House passed. But you know what? We're okay with that because our priority is putting some of the surplus revenue that we're collecting back in the pocket of taxpayers. PIT is one way to do that, but the strategies that our Senate colleagues have advanced are other ways to do that. And in the end, it's still money back in people's pockets.
You know, we talk about that difference between 15 and 50%, but the big difference is the amount that Governor Justice wanted to give back, which is closer to $1.3 or $1.4 billion. The Senate plan comes in at $600 million or so. The other part of that is the governor's plan and the House passed plan targets all West Virginia taxpayers. The Senate plan shifts a good deal of focus over to the business side of the equation. What's your take on those differences in the bills?
Well, it does, but if you look very closely at what the Senate proposed, the businesses that the Senate plan addresses are the very smallest West Virginia businesses. So they are not the large C corporations. They are LLCs and S corps, which are the majority of West Virginia's small businesses. So while they did structure it differently, in the aggregate, it's still a lot of money in the pockets of actual West Virginians. So we're not at odds here. We have an opportunity to get something accomplished this session. I'm still really optimistic about where we are.
But you'd have to agree, though, that the Senate plan definitely benefits business owners, and all West Virginians aren't business owners. All West Virginia taxpayers are taxpayers, though. So if more of the money is shifted toward the business side of the equation, that means ordinary West Virginians that don't own their own business are going to be seeing less money than they would have been under the governor's plan.
Yeah, I mean, that's just math. I think that's absolutely right.
Very good. Also, you'd be in agreement with parts of the Senate plan. I mean, they talk about the car rebate, which does affect everybody, including business owners. And they talk about the 50% machinery and inventory tax, which was voted down by residents. So you would be in favor of those parts of the Senate bill?
Well, it's a cumbersome way to get there. So, I mean, I supported Amendment 2. I wrote it. I wrote Amendment 2 that was on the ballot this year. I supported it. I would support it again. But the voters did reject it. But don't forget what the voters rejected. So what the voters rejected was that the voters rejected a plan that would have taken revenue out of counties and local governments. So the Senate plan actually doesn't do that. The Senate plan is an entirely state-based plan. It doesn't impact taxes paid to local entities of government. So the political subdivisions of West Virginia are unimpacted by the Senate plan. So I think it's a bit of an apples and oranges comparison.
Charles, I think you have some follow-ups there.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, I wanted to ask a little bit specifically in the Senate plan about the triggers. That was not in the House plan. Do you think that will survive the compromise? I think that was one of the attractive elements to folks when we saw their plan, was the kind of the mechanisms in there to further lower it as we go on.
So we will support that, sure. We will support strategies that let us take bigger and bigger bites at the personal income tax. It's the strategy that's been tried and executed successfully elsewhere. So we've got working models to study and to review. We've done that. I think our Senate colleagues have done that also. So I think the short answer is yes, we would be supporting that.
Okay, well, and the next thing that was among your three big points that we wanted to talk about was the bill that passed yesterday, our renewed effort to split up the DHHR. Once again, this was a bill that was tried last year. It was vetoed. We had the ensuing, the McChrystal report, everything that happened with Secretary Crouch. Tell us what's different this time. Delegate Summers has been spearheading that effort, spent over a year studying it. Tell us what we've learned in that time that's different than the last time around.
Yeah, happy to. This is a big priority for both bodies of the legislature and for the executive branch this session. So I certainly don't want to speak for the executive, but I know they've been with us at every step along the way as we've worked on these bills this session. So the bill we passed out of the House yesterday made that separation into three entities. So an entity to each of the three entities focused on specific parts of the overall mission of DHHR. And we've taken elements of the McChrystal report, we've taken elements of the executive branch's recommendation, we've taken elements of our own study based on our Legislative Oversight Commission on Health and Human Resources Accountability that did a year-long study in its own right, and we've put all those elements into the bill that was passed yesterday. This has really been a group effort, so there's been no one holding the pencil alone on this. Delegate Summers did champion it on behalf of the House, but Delegate Rohrbach, our Deputy Speaker, our former Health Committee Chair, did significant work on this bill. Senator Tom Chikubo, Senator Eric Tarr, both did significant work on this bill, as well as all of the executive branch working together on this. So I'm happy about this one. I'm happy that we're going to be able to bring some additional focus on some of the areas where we've seen some less than stellar performance as a government over the last several years. So this one's going to be one of the most impactful bills that we pass this session.
One of the things that Delegate Summers said on the floor yesterday that really stood out to me was that although we are, taking one agency and breaking into three, the intention here is not to grow the size of government, and the fiscal note attached to the bill actually points out that because of the streamlining plan, this is supposed to result in a net savings. Could you talk a little bit about that plan? I think it's supposed to be delivered the year after this goes into effect.
Yeah, so the effective date on the bill is next January. We think that at worst, the bill is a revenue neutral bill. And at best, we think it actually will result in savings. So in a recent report to our legislative committees, the new management of DHHR was pleased to report a finding of $83 million unallocated based on just a more thorough, more comprehensive review of the agency budget structure. And I know that our Senate colleagues have worked very hard so far this legislative session in really drilling down into the budget structure of DHHR so that the actual structure of the budget document that we adopt is more easily usable in terms of oversight and management. So we think at worst it's a net neutral bill, and at best there'll be some savings realized.
Okay, great. Well, and the last of your big 3 points was about, a long-term sustainable fix for PEIA. And that's kind of different than what we've heard from some of the other guests we've talked to on our program so far this year. They were talking about, they thought we were going to have to do at least another year of one-time allocations. It sounds like you guys are latched on a longer-term fix now. Is that right?
Well, I'm not saying that we wouldn't put more money into PEIA this year to keep the program solvent and sustainable. I mean, we'll do what's necessary to maintain the viability of our program because it's so important to so many of our citizens. We have a disproportionately high number of West Virginians who take advantage of that coverage. But we also want to be sure that we're not just, no pun intended here, putting Band-Aids on the problem, that we want to actually solve it. And we're happy that we're taking steps in that direction. So that includes things like who's covered, who's not. Are we adequately reimbursing hospitals? So we've seen some of the calamitous situations that happen and some of the calamity that ensues when our healthcare institutions think that they're being underpaid by our state's insurance program. So we want to be sure we're avoiding that. So we've worked with the hospitals. They've been with us in many, many meetings. They've been with us as we've crafted and reviewed proposals to make some reform to PEIA this session. We think we're going to get that accomplished too. We're happy about that one.
I want to jump in here with a couple follow-ups on all three of the areas, and we'll start with PEIA because that's where you left off. I've already seen some pushback starting to develop about some of the things that haven't been agreed to that are just being discussed in committee meetings, such as if a spouse works not in state government but is on the state government insurance but has insurance available from their work, different trade-offs there, the 80-20 split, things like that. Do you think we can get to the point where state workers are comfortable with the plan, knowing that it's going to be solvent moving forward?
Oh, I think so, because the priority is a solvent plan. The priority is a long-term is a plan that's long-term viable, that doesn't cause people the angst of having to worry about what's going to happen every year when the legislature convenes to make sure that health insurance is still available. So certainty is a good thing in this area, and that's what we're out to provide, and I think we'll get it.
Oh, and I think that if they know, hey, I'm going to be able to go to any hospital in the state of West Virginia, absolutely there's some trade-offs there, and we all see it in the private sector. Every year our insurance policies come due. So
sure.
Going back to the DHHR split up, the big concern that I've had and I've heard others voice is the timetable, because we all agree we have this huge agency and now we're going to separate it and people are going to be assigned to different agencies and they'll have different leadership in place possibly and things like that. I mean, do you think the timetable is reasonable, or is that something you guys may have to look at and say, it may take longer to get this broken apart like we want it to be?
Well, let's not be naive. No one should be on this. This is a multi-year effort, and it will absolutely be a multi-year effort, and that's fine. It is the largest entity of state government by budget dollars, by no small margin. It is the largest entity of government by budget dollars. So no doubt at all when the three cabinet level officers who take effect as a result of this bill begin implementing the plan, begin deciding how they'll administer their three branches within what used to be DHHR, they'll find things that no one thought about as a result, or as we develop this bill. You know what? That's great. We want them to come tell us what they've learned. We want them to show us, you know what? You have this sub-agency in in health when it really should be in human services, okay, that's we want you to tell us. So they'll inform us based on their own experience, and we'll respond to it. The priority here is just bringing more focus to the most vulnerable populations of West Virginians and doing it quickly.
Is the bill crafted flexible enough to allow those changes to happen, or will they have to come back to the legislature to move, this from Pod A to Pod B, as the case may be?
There is significant flexibility in the bill already. There may be some administrative realignment that we have to do as the process unfolds, but there's significant flexibility in the bill, and that's by design.
Excellent. Back on the tax issue, and I know you guys probably get tired of talking about it, but one of the big selling points that the governor was pushing on his road tours and such, and in discussions with us recently, was the fact that hey, 50% shouts to the rest of the world, West Virginia is open for business. We want you here. It's open for residents to come here to help improve West Virginia's declining population situation. I have to admit, 50% is a heck of a lot more sexy than 15%, Roger. I mean, do you think we can get that up? And so the target right now for the Senate is $600 million. The governor's bill is 1.3 or 1.4. Can we push that $600 million forward and maybe get the PIT cut the first year to 30%, like it was recommended?
We think so. I mean, that's the position of the House. We obviously want to double and quadruple down on that number as much as possible. But that's why I particularly like your earlier question about our position with respect to additional triggers in the bill. So among the reasons why we'll be supportive of that approach is that we want to take as many bites and as big a bites as possible, as quickly as possible. And building those triggers in right up front now says to the world exactly what you just said, that look, if the economy continues apace and we continue to experience what we've experienced these last 4 years, we'll be at 50%. In fact, we'll be beyond 50% in very short order.
One last tax question, then we're going to get to an issue that you've been a leader on in the education field. But did you attend the tax summit with Grover Norquist and Steve Moore the other day? I mean, I was there. Steve Moore was very, very plain when he said "go big or go home." He made it sound like maybe 50% wasn't even enough.
He did.
Thoughts on that?
Well, look, we all want to cut taxes. You could ask any West Virginian anywhere who wants to cut taxes, and every hand will raise. There's 134 of us, and we'll raise our hands too.
Very good, very good. Well, I know you were a leader and it passed the House early. I know the Senate's passed a version trying to address K through 3 in literacy and math especially. Talk to us about your thoughts on the bill that you proposed in the Senate side bill as well. Where are we at on those?
Yeah, so that's a great one. So that's going to be another big deal that we end up leaving this session having completed. I'm confident about that one. So those two proposals right now are working their way through the House. They began as just a basic bill to put teachers' aides in first and second and eventually third grade classrooms. It's evolved and grown into a proposal now to more comprehensively address early childhood literacy and numeracy. So in other words, making sure that by the time kids finish the third grade, they're reading at grade level and they're performing basic mathematic functions at grade level. Well, I know the House has taken that bill through its committee process. The Senate is doing so right now. That's one I'm confident we're going to get finished this year. We cannot have another year of education performance scores like what we saw this past summer. But both bodies are moving on that already. I've every confidence we'll get that one done.
Well, I want to congratulate you on that and applaud the effort, because I mean the education system, the education of our children is clearly the future of the state. And the pandemic left us in worse shape than we've ever been, I think. So
it did. It absolutely did. We learned a lot of things from the pandemic, but one of the things we learned is that remote action is great for what it's great for. But there's other things that just need a caring adult to be in the room with the child.
especially that K through 3 age group, K through third grade age group. I think they struggle with the remote learning more than any other. So we applaud you on that. Charles, anything you had?
My own children are in kindergarten and first grade, and I see how difficult it is to deliver educational instruction to them. And my wife is a teacher. We work at it very hard in our household. I can't imagine how handicapped children would be if they were that age in a household where education wasn't taken seriously and they were left to sit at a laptop computer screen for a year, which our children were.
Charles, any other follow-ups?
No, I just wanted to say thank you very much for your time and for coming on the show today. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, thanks for having me.
Mr. Speaker, anything you'd like to add to wrap up?
No, sir. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, well, this is Legislature This Week. We thank Speaker Roger Hanshaw for joining us, and we'll be right back after this message.
Your heart is in the best hands. Mon Health Heart and Vascular is the highest ranked cardiovascular program in the state of West Virginia by the American College of Cardiology. Choose Mon Health. Feel the difference.
Welcome to Legislature This Week, brought to you by West Virginia News, the State Journal, and West Virginia Public Broadcasting. Legislature This Week is sponsored by Mon Health Systems, as well as SIVA WV and the West Virginia High Technology Consortium. We told you we had a big show today, and we've got the president of the West Virginia Senate, Craig Blair, with us. Craig, thank you for joining us. We're honored to have you.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Also with us is West Virginia News Senior Government Affairs writer Charles Young, and he's going to kick off the questions. Go ahead, Charles.
Thanks, sir. I wanted to ask you about a poll that recently came out from the WV Coalition in Truth and History. That poll, 76% of respondents said they felt like the legislature is spending too much time on divisive social issues. What do you think of that assessment of this year's legislative session? Do you think that these issues are a distraction, or do you think this poll has gotten it wrong?
I have no idea who took the poll, whether the poll is accurate or not. There's all kinds of issues. We have 134 legislators from all over the state that have priorities for their districts, their communities. And so what makes it onto the agenda and what doesn't make it onto the agenda all depends on the will of the caucuses on both the House and the Senate. So I don't know how better to answer that from that standpoint.
Senator, we know you guys have been quite busy on some key issues, and we had Speaker Hanshaw on before you. The big issue, I think, on everybody's plate is the tax issue and the income tax. And we had Grover Norquist in town and Steve Moore, who said, go big or go home. You've explained the Senate view pretty well, but let's dive into that a little bit. You pointed out that going to zero on the PIT could impact residents who are living in West Virginia and work in other states. Also, the Senate has voiced very strong concern over the governor's projections of $1.3 billion being available for tax relief, and the Senate bill calls for $600 million. Where do we stand on those two issues?
Okay, well, first of all, on the Senate side, we actually took what we had and worked backwards, knowing what you got in true excess revenues. And the number for that is $600 million. And that's because we've held a flatline budget with the help of the House and the governor. We've all worked together to do that over the last 4 years, maintaining a $4.65 billion budget. That frees up $600 million. Now, you can't look at that as because this year we're going to finish up with a $1.6 to $2 billion budget. $600 million of that's from the flatline budget. Half of that, though, let's say it's $2 billion for the sake of easy math. That's what we end up at the end of this fiscal year. $1 billion of that $2 billion will be coming from the severance taxes on our fossil fuels that we sell. Now, they could evaporate because we all know what's going on in Eastern Europe and the prices are up. And in the state of West Virginia, it's always up and down, up and down. You cannot build tax relief on those funds, okay? If you do that, you will end up having to come back and do a tax increase on the people of West Virginia. The rest of the funds has come from is wage and wage inflation, the personal income tax right now, which makes up well over half of our revenue in general to begin with, than the sales tax that's out there. And 58% of our population lives on border counties, so you have to be careful with that because you can end up forcing people to go cross border to buy what's going on. So the true number is 600 million. You can have a little flexibility, but that's where we're at. So now we started working backwards from that. A 10% reduction in the personal income tax is $250 million. So we used 15%, that's $375 million of the 600 million that we know for certain that we can do. And we put triggers in it too. And the triggers is as our economy continues to grow and expand, and we're counting on that we'll be able to continue to reduce that personal income tax. But the personal income tax only affects those that are working. It does almost nothing for seniors. It does almost nothing for our working poor. And we want to have a rising tide that lifts all boats and has a good effect for all West Virginians. So we went and did, and this is the governor's bill, of the 100% of tax credit, refundable tax credit on your automobile tax. It doesn't affect the counties in any way. The counties still get their revenue stream from that, but you file that, and even if you owe no tax at all, you'll get a check back for what you paid on your personal property tax on your automobile. So the cost to that was $140 million, and you add that on to there. Then we'd address the marriage penalty. That one gets a little bit in the weeds, but the bottom line on the marriage penalty is that if you pay less taxes because you're single than what you're married, that really doesn't make a lot of sense. We need to tax people fairly across the board for that on their income. So that we try to do that. And then we did a credit for 90 to 100% disabled veterans on their homestead exemption on that. And so there's a credit that comes back from that. Then there's one last thing, and that is a 50% of refundable tax credit against your personal income tax for small business. And small business makes up the vast majority of the job creators and the employment opportunities that you have in the state of West Virginia. And when we were going through the Amendment 2 process, we heard that people, the governor say for one, that you don't want to give big tax breaks to out-of-state businesses. And so this wouldn't do that because you can't use it on your corporate net. If you're a C Corp, you file the corporate net, you never get there. But your mom and pop stores that are up and down our streets everywhere, your plumbers, your electricians, your refrigeration, HVAC, the list goes on, doctors, dentists, they would all be eligible for that, and it makes it so that they can actually create more jobs and be more profitable in the state of West Virginia. So that was the mindset behind all that, and that kept us, when it's over and done with, that kept us in that $600 million window. And on that 50% one, that doesn't have any triggers, and nor does the 100%. Well, I guess you don't need a trigger on the 100% on automobiles. It is what it is. So we're living within our means. And let me add one last thing. There was a lot of discussion when we were doing Amendment 2 that people voted against it because they wanted personal income tax. But there was also a lot of discussion that people were voting against all the tax reductions on this because they wanted to see the legislature, who everybody has done a great job of managing these resources, and we've got a lot of unfunded liabilities into the future, deferred maintenances. Medicaid could cost us $125 million more a year right now because the reimbursement rate has is going to change because West Virginians are doing better. Economically, we're doing better. So that changes that reimbursement rate. There are a host of things that are out there that are looming that we need to be able to do it. I'll close with this. Over the last 3 years, the amount of money coming into our road fund, which is paid for by the fuel tax on gas, the fuels, and then the sales tax on your automobile and the licenses and registrations and all that. Those funds have been steadily declining, and over the last 4 years, we've transferred $100 million, $120 million, and $150 million to the road fund. This allows us to keep our priority of taking care of our infrastructure so that we can do better for our citizens, as well as make ourselves more attractive to business, because our ultimate goal is to keep our young people living here in our state, but we got to have gainful employment. And if we do that, we're on the upward escalator instead of the downward spiral.
Well, Senator, let's talk about these numbers real quick. I know you have a limited time. So you mentioned $1 billion in severance tax, which can't be factored in to the income tax plan, is what the Senate is saying. So what happens with the $1 billion? Where does that money go? Are we creating big government by putting it towards programming, or where does the $1 billion go?
Oh, you guys don't know me very well. I'm not big government in any way. What you do is you reinvest it in yourself. And look, right now, the way that we have to compete with Ohio, Kentucky, Pennsylvania. I just left a meeting with a company that's looking to come here and create over 1,000 jobs in the state of West Virginia. But you got to be able to have the resources to be able to attract them here. I just explained about moving money to the road fund, the Medicaid reimbursement changing, making sure that we got enough money in our rainy day fund to keep our bond ratings at a really, really good level that saves us interest rates. We're doing there's all these different wants and needs that are out there, and what we've done is just basically threaded the needle. And when I say threaded the needle, you have $600 million in tax relief that we know, that we're certain that we're not going to have to come back later and say that we need to do increase your taxes on your personal income tax. We know that that's not going to happen with that number. But putting it into the infrastructure and having it available to be able to grow our state so that we got these job opportunities. We're winning. We're winning in a big way. We all recognize that. And so you just don't want to cash strap yourself to the point that you can't continue this cycle forward, so that we can actually, instead of having school closings and consolidations, we're talking about having more children in this state. And that's, forgive me for saying this, but a highly educated student, instead of being our number one export out of the state, stays here, and they're an economic driver engine. And then the more people that you got in the workforce, the more people are paying taxes, and the lower you can make the taxes on everyone. It's a winning scenario that works. No, it's working.
But your argument, the Senate argument would be, get the jobs and the people will come. The governor's argument has clearly been, cut the income tax. That'll lure more people here. I mean, West Virginia already has a bit of a tight job market in terms of being able to fill the positions that are open. We're talking about adding the need for 2,500 teacher aides coming up here soon. That's a big sticking point in my thought process, is where are we going to get all these extra people if we don't have people to fill the jobs we have now?
The two most mobile things in our society, in this country, is labor and capital. Okay? If you make it to where people can be profitable, businesses can be profitable, they will come here. Labor will come and the businesses will come along with that. And so remember, we're the only state out there that has a declining population. And so you got to be able to change that dynamic. But you also need to make, for our number one export, our children, having job opportunities here as well. They already love the state. They love the state, but they have to go elsewhere to be able to find those jobs. Not everybody's going to be a coal miner or in the gas industry. You got to be able to have a holistic approach to be able to get them all.
Charles, I think you have a question on PEIA that we can probably slip in here. We've got about 3 minutes left, I believe.
Yes, sir. I was just wanting to ask about your hopes for finding a solution for the long-term solvency of PEIA, so that we don't have to keep doing these year-to-year fixes. We talked to Speaker Hanshaw earlier, and that was kind of the path he saw us going down by the end of the session. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, right now, our health committee is working on a PEIA long-term fix on it. But what we did last year is that we all know Wheeling Hospital said that they were going to stop taking PEIA. We seen that coming last year in the Senate. We passed that out, but it didn't make it across the finish line. This year, that's a $40 million price tag, by the way, base building, year in, year out. So we're taking it to 110% Medicaid, just like Medicare, reimbursement, is what we did last year. We have to have a long-term fix for this, and so we're working on that plan. The biggest problem with it right now, with PEIA though, is that it's based on wages instead of based on risk. There's not another healthcare plan out there in the country. So what we've got here is workers' comp version 2.0, and if we do not address this, we are going to end up paying for it big time in the future. But we've had teacher strikes over this, and a long-term fix. There hasn't been any increases in the premiums since 2014, okay? So that's sort of been in lieu of raises before we got into the last 3 or 4 years, where we did 5% across the board 3 times for our teachers, our school personnel, and our state employees. And we want to do more. We want to do more. But this is where you grow the tax base to be able to do that. Base building. Understand that if you base build into your budget, you can't count on the revenues, or you'll be on that cycle that we've been in the past, where you're cutting government. When the governor was first elected, he wanted to raise taxes $450 million because there was a $450 million deficit. We've controlled our spending and managing it in such a way that we can actually broaden our tax base without increasing taxes, but have more people paying it. And then that comes into the equation on solving PEIA long term.
Senator, anything, I know you've got to leave us to get to the Senate to convene, so anything you'd like to add to wrap up?
I'll wrap up with this. For your listeners out there, the people that you got working here in the Capitol are doing a wonderful job. When people hear them arguing back and forth about things, this is the part of the process. Our founding fathers designed it to be just the way it is. And the good things come out. Sometimes it takes time for the body to catch up with what's going on. But to the greater degree, we're operating at the speed of business here now instead of the speed of government. I'm very proud of that. And I think our constituents across the state have recognized that, and that's why you see supermajorities of both parties here. So thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Senator, we appreciate you. Senate President Craig Blair joining us. This is Legislature This Week, and we'll be right back after this important message.
Here's the better opportunity you're looking for. Enhancing health and wellness of our community, one patient at a time. Apply today at monhealth.com/careers. Choose Mon Health. Feel the difference.
Welcome to Legislature This Week, brought to you by West Virginia News, the State Journal, and West Virginia Public Broadcasting. Legislature This Week is sponsored by Mon Health Systems, as well as SEVA WV and the West Virginia High Technology Consortium. We're glad to have Randy Yohe with West Virginia Public Broadcasting back. We also have Charles Young with us. Lots of things going on in the Capitol. Very noisy there today, Randy, but big public hearing on the campus carry bill.
Say that again, John. It sounds like a waterfall in here.
I said there was a big public hearing on the campus carry bill today, correct?
Yes, we had about, I imagine 35 speakers, 33 of them against the bill, 2 for the bill. So that tells you something right there. And we heard from a lot of WVU students and teachers, Marshall students and teachers as well, people that are in the social sciences, and all of them they're fearing the worst by allowing the concealed carry permits to work on campus. One of the fellows from the NRA that was for the bill explained that it's already basically legal if you have a concealed carry permit in West Virginia to take your gun onto campus, whether you can go in a particular stadium or office or classroom building is dependent on what the signage is and what the policies are. But they say that this just extends the safety of people. In light of what happened in Michigan State on Monday, emotions are raw about this one. It's going to be taken up by the House Judiciary Committee this afternoon at 1:30, so we'll see how it travels. But it seems like it has Republican support.
Well, say, Rady, I was going to ask about that. I only got to, listen to the first few speakers. I only heard one person who spoke against it. How did what happened at Michigan State play into it? I saw on social media that was brought up time and time again. What did folks have to say about what happened there?
Well, it hit me hard because I went to Michigan State. That's my alma mater, and I have a nephew there. So it hit me personally on Monday. And it was mentioned by a good half a dozen of the speakers today and some people talked to me afterwards that said in a tight classroom where there's really no but one door in and out, there's no back door per se, what do you want to happen when you've got a bunch of students here, you've got a person with a gun there, and you're the teacher that's in the middle of them? Do you want to throw a couple chairs at them, or do you want to use your weapon? That's what we're talking about, arming teachers in our public schools. This takes it a step further and allows any student with a concealed carry permit to do just that. Are they well trained? The other side of the question is that you pull out a gun in that situation that maybe you haven't used for 6 months or a year or just once when you took your classes, and it's chaos and commotion. Do you want to start shooting? It's a very debatable point.
Well, I kind of wanted to ask what, you're hearing afterwards. I know you said you went to a press conference that they had afterwards. I feel like this happens time and time again as we have these public hearings. Very engaged and active members of the community come and they share these very emotional stories, and it falls on deaf ears. Do you think that there's going to be any sort of resonance with this one, or is it just the same thing that we've seen over and over?
Maybe. As you watched some of the legislators when they listened in the public hearing, they weren't fiddling with their phones. They weren't, ignoring. I saw more attentiveness than I've seen before. And what, this has been around now 3-4 years. And you explained the scenario. That's what's happened every time. I did see more attentiveness. I went up to ask a couple of them afterwards if they wanted to give me, or first I asked, how did you stand on campus carry? They're for it. Did they want to go on the air and give me their opinion? No. 3 of them, no. I did finally get Brandon Steele out of Raleigh County to talk to me. So there's still thought involved, I think.
Sure. Okay, well, I was going to ask a little bit, yesterday the House passed their DHHR bill, the one that would split the DHHR up into 3 entities. What are you hearing about that? Are folks thinking that this time these changes will have an impact? That again, we tried this last year. It led to this whole situation with the McChrystal report and Secretary Crouch retiring, all the fallout there, all the changes. It sounded like from what folks said on the floor yesterday that there is some optimism that there are, mechanisms within the bill for accountability and to make sure these things get put into place. What are folks thinking about that?
The magic words I heard yesterday was, well, we think it's okay, but it's a first step. We've got to do something. I mean, both sides of the aisle are saying we've got to do something. We know it's broken. What do we do to fix it? Good first step is what I heard from Democrats and Republicans, and I believe that the executive's on board with this as well. the implementation of the Crystal Report got rid of this siloing and get better intercommunication and listening to the boots on the ground people from the people upstairs that weren't hearing what they were saying. And I think that those things are being implemented and will be implemented. Dividing it into three, I mean, we heard Amy Summers, the chair of the House Health Committee, just read off a laundry list of horrible things that have happened in the interviews and interims over the past year that they've done. Just people under supervision getting a car and then killing themselves in a fiery crash, or hands tied for 24 hours except to take a shower. We heard Delegate Mike Pushkin out of Kanawha County say that we've just gotten emails today that parents of foster kids are not getting their monthly or weekly checks, that adoptive parents aren't getting the substantive monies that they're supposed to get every period, that the system is broken right now, and they're not even helping our most vulnerable kids, these kids in state custody. So I think it's almost a no-brainer that this is going to pass. I mean, they're going to do some fine-tuning. Both, remember, on the first day of the session, the House, boom, I mean the Senate, boom, put through Senate Bill 126. They're almost similar. I mean, right, I asked afterwards the communication directors for House and Senate, so will they form a conference committee? Will they, I said, it's a little too early to tell. We both want to keep our bills alive so we can tweak this, tweak that, but it sounds like everybody's on the same page.
One of the concerns I had with the DHHR bill split is the implementation of it, because it's a broken system. But you start moving people's cheese, so to speak, and they get shifted to this supervisor or this department and things like that. What's going to happen in the meantime? Because you're right. I mean, we hear these horror stories about late payments and such, and these are families that aren't necessarily well off to begin with, that are trying to make a difference, and suddenly they're not getting that subsidy, so they're having to fend and feed and clothe additional children without the state money coming through. Do you think it's a reasonable time frame to take the state's largest entity and break it in three parts?
It's by what? Is it January, July 1st, 2024? It's one of the two. I think July 1st, 2024 fiscal year.
The bill's effective in January, but then the streamlining plan is due in June.
Okay. But what's interesting is that right now, the DHHR administration is charged with, as soon as this bill passes, and it'll be effective from passage, you watch, they're charged with getting the lower rungs together. That this bill doesn't work with the bureaus down. All right, let's figure out how we can put this together administratively so that we have the Division of Health, the Division of Services, and the Division of Facilities, and how can we administratively do this to save the taxpayers money, to not do a lot of duplication. So that's the job before the split to three even happens. So they're thinking ahead there, and it's fluid too. The bill allows, let's assess this. Let's have LACRA look at this every 4 months. We know it's a first step, and we know it's not a perfect proposal. So let's make sure that we have the sandpaper out from fine to coarse, and use that all the way through to try to tailor this so it works the best. It's open-ended. I think it seems well thought out.
Charles, we were discussing earlier some concerns with PEIA, and Randy, are you hearing much pushback? I've heard some considerable pushback about some of the plans to, shift some of the cost of premiums and things like that to the workers. It was clear in talking with the Senate President and Speaker Hanshaw that those are being discussed. What are you hearing about PEIA?
Not much. Most of that's going on behind closed doors now. There's not really the bills that have come out to the floor or even to the committee to be discussed that much. So, but of course, yeah, it's almost the elephant in the room when you're talking about $500 million down the road that they're going to need. Will they have to raise premiums? Will they, what's going to happen when justice leaves? Because because he's committed $100 million every year of his term to shore up things. The whole hospital situation where we heard Wheeling say after July 1st, we won't take any PEI patients. I'm not hearing a lot, and I don't think, Charles, you are either out loud, but you know that it's being discussed, and it is on agendas. So, like, now's the time. We're running out of time to get this discussed. I'm afraid that something might happen and it might not get the attention it deserves, but I'm not sure.
I was going to say, we are at that point in the process where things are happening less on the floor, out in the open. Today, 36, 37, we're beyond the halfway point, so.
I'll tell you what's interesting. If we want to shift to taxes just really briefly, because we're talking about the other elephant in the room. And I talked to Vernon Criss, the chair of the House Finance Committee, who was very frank and open once he saw the Senate tax plan. He said, I want to know a little bit about how this is going to work for the veterans. Let's talk about this 50% rebate for small businesses on business inventory. How do you define a small business? Is it 100 workers or less? He wanted to know some fine points on defining the 5 options of the Senate tax plan, and is very open to say that there's good discussion going on between the Senate, the House, and the executive branch, contrary to popular opinion, but for the feud that continues to boil a bit between Blair and Justice. I think that they're putting that aside and saying, let's see if we can accomplish on this. So the big question is, are we going to see tax reform at the end of this? And if so, what will it be? Remains to be seen, but I think that we're closer to it now than we were a week ago.
Yeah, I definitely think there was sort of, a tone of congeniality and getting along during the tax roundtable the other day, that, just the fact that we got everybody at the table was a world away from where we were a couple of weeks ago when we, had you on and you had just heard that, Tar said he was in no rush. It might not even happen this session. It seemed like, we made a lot of progress since then.
Right, yeah, and the discussions at the table aren't about whether you're corrupt or part of the swamp, but let's talk about this aspect of the bill, and let's see how it's funded, and let's, the things that you're supposed to talk about at the table is what they seem to be talking about now.
I think it's kind of interesting. We had Steve Moore say, go big or go home. You got the Senate saying we only have $600 million because we're not willing to count the $1 billion in severance tax. Which is a question I encourage both of you to seek out. I tried to get Craig Blair to tell me, well, what are we spending the $1 billion on if we're not going to refund it back to the people? And, infrastructure and, business incentives and things like that. The other thing is, Randy, I did some quick math on some numbers that they gave us this morning. So of the $600 million from the Senate, there's $590 million of it committed to small businesses, because the business owners will get the tax rebate from the cars. The business owners will get the personal income tax rebate, and they'll get $200 million roughly in inventory and machinery tax. So the Senate can't say it's not a business-friendly plan, whereas the Justice House plan is much more focused on everybody in West Virginia. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, yes, I would. They finally have put getting defeated with Amendment 2 behind them. There was a point in time where we talked to Eric Tarr. We didn't even think that the Senate was going to present anything at all. And then, boom, they come out with this well-thought-out, worked-on for months plan. So they just, kept it in their back pocket until they were ready to present it. It's hard, I think, to fathom when you start talking about 100 million here and $1 billion there. Us regular Joes don't totally understand tossing around that kind of money. So it's that measure of how much you're going to give back to the people in rebates. And rebates aren't the easiest thing to do. It's not like not having it. With rebates, you got to put a whole system in. And I don't think it's a cakewalk. But the question is, how much you're going to give back compared to how much you're going to have to pay for what we need to pay to keep the state operating? I don't know. You tell me.
Well, I tell you what, Charles and Randy, we appreciate you guys being here. Anything else you'd like to discuss?
keep watching the legislature today, 6 o'clock. It's getting more and more interesting as we go along, and we're packing that show with everything that happens. I know you tell everything that happened during the week. We try to boil it down in the day, and it's no cakewalk either, but we're doing it.
I tell you what, you guys are doing a great job. I've been able to catch several of them. I know Charles is a faithful viewer as well. We appreciate West Virginia Public Broadcasting and the efforts they're doing at the state legislature this year. And we appreciate Randy Yohe for joining us on Legislature This week. Until the next time, be good, be yourself, and let's move West Virginia forward.
Your heart is in the best hands. Mon Health Heart and Vascular is the highest ranked cardiovascular program in the state of West Virginia by the American College of Cardiology. Choose Mon Health. Feel the difference.